I was listening to Laura, I thought about the storytelling journey, and I realized that my mother says I've been a storyteller all my life. I've been doing it through spellbinders and other ways, I guess, for about 6 years. And what I want to say to start with is the first storyteller I ever knew was my grandfather. I called him Pop. And so every time I'm telling to a new audience, I like to tell a story that I call a Pop tale. And it's either a story he told me when I was growing up, or a story he would have told me if he'd heard it first. So this is a story called Pop and the Lost Nut. My grandparents lived on a small farm up in North Georgia. They didn't have many neighbors, but there was one family that they always talked about, and all the other neighbors talked about. It was a family called the Nutts, the N-U-T-T-S. These were nice people. They were great fishermen and pretty good farmers. But they must have been out fishing or plowing or something when the good Lord passed out brains, because they were always doing something that made people say, you know, those nuts are properly named. Now, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background on them. The head of the family was a fellow named Peter Nutt. And pretty soon people were just calling him Pete Nutt. And then they shortened that even further to P-Nut. And then they started calling him Goober, because that's what they called peanuts in Georgia. Well, when Goober got married, he married a young woman named Hazel Brown, so she became Hazelnut. And their first children were twin boys, and they named them Walter and Chester. And of course, everybody was soon calling them Walnut and Chestnut. But and they had a little baby sister named Shelley. So this story happened though when the Nutts had a family reunion, and Goober's two brothers brought their families to visit. And the oldest children in each of those families were boys. And they were all about the same age. And there were 7 of them, because there was another set of twins and a set of triplets. So these boys, same age, they looked so much alike that even their mamas had a hard time telling them apart. And they were alike in a lot of other ways too. If you stood them in a row, they'd all be next to useless. And they all loved baseball. So when they all gathered and they found out that there was a minor league baseball team in Atlanta called the Crackers, they decided they had to go see this team play, because they'd never seen a professional baseball team. Now, even though it was a 3-day trip for them to go there, have to walk. It was a 3-day trip for them to go down there, see the game, and get back. But they were sure they could do it. So they went and asked their mamas if they could do it. And the thought of those 7 boys going to Atlanta by themselves scared their mamas witless. I mean, because they knew they were not the brightest kids around. But they talked about it. They all got together. They talked about it. And they said, you know, we got to let them grow up sometime. And they're almost 20 years old, so we ought to let them. So they packed a lunch for them, enough food for them to last them the 3 days, and called them together and said, we're going to let you do this. But we're worried about you. Atlanta's a big city, and we're worried about what might happen to you. So every once in a while, we want you to stop and do a head count, so that we're sure that all 7 of them are still there. They said, okay. So the next morning, bright and early, they got up, they took their lunch, and they headed on down the road. And they were making a good time. They were having a good time, talking about all the things they thought they were going to see in the big city. And it got to be lunchtime, and so they stopped and sat down and ate some of their food. And one of them spotted a blackberry patch over here, and another one spotted a peach orchard over here. And so they started going and gathering fruit for their dessert. And pretty soon, Walnut, he decided it was time for them to get back on the road. So he whistled, and all of them came back in there. Suddenly he's surrounded by all these other little nuts. And Walter, then he remembered what his mom had said. He said, I got to do a head count, so you guys line up. So they all lined up. And he went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's supposed to be 7 of us. Let me count again. 1, 2. No, we lost one. So he said, wait, maybe somebody else ought to count. So Walnut got in line, Chestnut comes out, and Chestnut counts them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, we've lost one. Somebody's missing. We can't go any further without him. So they start looking everywhere, under bushes, behind rocks, and finally, one of them, there's a well over on the other side of the road, one of them looks down at the well, and he sees this familiar face looking up. He said, I found him. He's down here in this here well. We got to get him out of there. Well, this wasn't your ordinary well with a bucket and a rope, and they didn't have a ladder. He's just down there. They can't figure out. So they talked about it for a while, and finally Chestnut lights up. He's, I got an idea. He said, let's do this. He said, I'll hang on the edge of the well, and one of you can shimmy down and hold on to my feet, and we'll just keep doing that until we'll create a ladder that he can climb out of. Well, those nut boys, they knew a good plan when they heard one, so they started doing that. And Chester's hanging on here, and pretty soon they've all shimmied down, and the last one goes down, and he knows that his feet are about to touch the water, and he says, my feet are almost down there, but before he can say nobody's grabbing my feet, Chester has to sneeze. And he sneezes, and he remembered what his mama told him. He covered his mouth. And of course, that put them all in the well. So now all the nuts are thrashing around down there, and they're happy to be back together and happy that they found the other one, but they don't want to die together. And they're hollering for help, and nobody's coming. And so finally, one of them, it may have been Chester, he says he notices that the sides of the well are kind of rough. They got rocks poking out and spaces between them. He says, I think we can climb out of here. And so they started trying to do it, and they did. It took a long time, but they finally got all the way out. And of course, they're sopping wet, so they took off their shirts and their overalls, and they hung them on the blackberry bush to dry. And they lay down in their long johns in the sun to dry out. And that's when my grandfather came along. He walks down the road, and he sees these 7 young fellows that look just alike lying there in their underwear. And I told you he's a storyteller, so he thinks there's got to be a story here. So he asks them what's happening. They all start talking at once, and they're talking about how they counted and they lost one, and he fell in the well, and then they all fell in the well. While they're talking, my grandfather, Pop, he goes over and looks at the well. And he sees a familiar face looking up. He sees his reflection coming up from the water in the well. And he pretty quickly figures out what's happening. And about time he figures that out, the story has been finished. And so whoever's telling the story said, listen, sir, said could you do us a favor? Said, we think we're all together now, but we need to count. And we didn't do, we're not sure we did such a good job of it last time, so would you count us? And my grandfather said, well, I got a better idea than that. He said, I see your overalls drying on the bush over there. He said, let's just count the overalls. Said, all of you had your own overalls, didn't you? So they take turns and they count those overalls lying on the blackberry bush. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We're all here. So they thank Pop graciously. He leaves. They put their overalls back on, and then they have a kind of a. He told me later that he heard that they had a meeting, and they got to talking. They said, maybe we ought not to go to Atlanta. So if one of us got lost half a day away from home, don't tell them what will happen to us in Atlanta. So they went home, and just before they got home, before they got inside the house, they said, let's do one more head count to be sure that we're still here. They were all here. Now, here's the thing. They had learned their lesson. So they didn't really count heads. They counted overalls. And when they finished counting, and they were happy that there were 7 pairs of overalls, they put their overalls back on. And went home to tell their mothers they had been worried for no reason at all.